The orphan and the emperor's fleet part the one-eyes. The child among stars, they found him in the wreckage of a burning sky. The night had not been quiet. It rarely was in the contested belts, where shattered moons hung like broken teeth and scavenger ships prowled the silence for scraps of metal, bodies, or memory. On the fourth rotation of the cycle, a vessel belonging to the emperor's household passed through the outer shoals of the Varasi Rim, its hull bristling with banners of gold light and ceremonial fire. It was not a warship, though it carried warriors. It was not a merchant ship, though it carried wealth. It was the House Bereth's royal envoy, gliding between embers of forgotten wars. It was there, amid twisted girders and drifting corpses, that the child floated. He was no larger than 6 winters, pale skin bruised with frost, his breathing shallow in a failing emergency shell. His tiny hand was pressed against the cracked visor of his helmet, as if reaching for something that would never come. The envoy's scanners almost dismissed him as debris. Almost. The one who ordered the retrieval was High Consort Valeri, wife to the Emperor's 3rd son. To the aliens who crewed the vessel, tall, angular beings with skin that glimmered like living glass, the child was not kin, not subject, not even sentient in the way they measured. To them he was a curiosity, a relic of a species long scattered by wars it could not win. They whispered among themselves as he was brought aboard, calling him pet, toy orphan of ash. But Valeri saw something different. The boy's eyes, when they opened, were not vacant. They burned, not with the glow of alien power or engineered perfection, but with the raw, unyielding defiance of survival. He should have been dead, yet he clung. He clung to life with an iron will no child should carry. The household named him Saren. He did not understand their tongue at first. He only knew the sounds of loss, the echo of fire, the collapse of all he had been born to. But in the months that followed, as the envoy returned to the Emperor's jeweled world, Saren learned. His mouth shaped their crystalline syllables, his ears bent to their music of command. Still, he was not of them. He could never be. He was clothed in finery like a doll, paraded before courtiers as Valeri's foundling, petted by nobles who marveled at his alien softness. He was a child. They saw a trinket, and yet in the shadow of the palace, Saren grew. The Emperor's world was a palace the size of a continent, its skies forever filled with the silhouettes of dreadnoughts and silver-winged couriers. Towers of living crystal rose from oceans of black stone, and every surface hummed faintly with power drawn from the deep crust of the planet itself. For Saren, it was a cage wrapped in wonder. He wandered its vast corridors barefoot, his steps echoing against mosaics older than his species. He listened to the songs of soldiers training in glass-walled arenas, their movements a dance of death performed with blades that sang when swung. He watched the skies ignite each evening as fleets departed for distant wars, the banners of the Emperor stretching like rivers of flame into the void. Saren had no banner, no blade, only hunger. He learned to run faster than the noble children, for they chased him in sport. He learned to climb higher, hiding in the ribbed vaults of the halls, for servants often struck him when masters weren't looking. He learned to observe, to anticipate the moods of those around him, for survival depended not on strength but on instinct. And instinct for Saren became sharper than any weapon. Valeri alone treated him with a semblance of care. She fed him, clothed him, even taught him to read the shifting glyphs of her people. She would stroke his hair with hands that glittered like carved quartz and whisper, "Little flame, you burn so quietly, yet I see the fire within." But even Valeri could not protect him from the cruelty of her kin. To them, Saren was entertainment. At feasts, they would toss him morsels as one would a hound. At ceremonies, they would display him, the human relic, a reminder of the lesser races extinguished by imperial conquest. And Saren endured. He did not cry where they could see. He did not rage when mocked. He watched. He listened. He remembered. Every insult became a stone in the wall he built inside himself, a fortress where his true self, his human self, remained unbroken. It was in his 12th year under the Emperor's roof that the First War thundered, close enough to shake the palace windows. The Dravathi Dominion, long silent in its abyssal clusters, surged from the dark like a tide of knives. Their fleets were black leviathans bristling with weapons unknown to imperial design, and their war cries rattled the bones of every courtier who heard them. Whole sectors burned, garrisons fell. For the first time in centuries, the emperor's household tasted fear. In the palace, the nobles boasted of strategy while hiding their trembling hands. Admirals argued over maps projected in vaulted chambers, their voices sharp as shattering glass. Warriors sharpened their blades in silence, their eyes cast upward to the skies already red with warning beacons. And Saren watched. He had no place among them, yet his blood surged with something they could not name. He remembered fire. He remembered loss. He remembered the silence of drifting alone, clutching life with teeth and nails while everything else fell away. To him, war was not banners and honor. It was hunger. It was survival. It was instinct. That instinct stirred again when he first saw the fleet formations glittering above the palace, preparing to launch. To the nobles, they were works of art, lines of perfect symmetry, wings of mirrored ships gliding in flawless harmony. To Saren's eyes, they were brittle, predictable, vulnerable. He did not yet know how he knew. He only felt it, like seeing the path of a predator before it struck, like hearing the faint shift of stone before it fell. Patterns opened themselves to him, invisible threads of movement and intent weaving into shapes no admiral spoke of. And deep within, something whispered, "This is where you belong." That night, as the palace trembled with distant cannon fire, Saren stood on the highest balcony, staring at the blackness beyond the stars. For the first time in his life, he felt the cage around him cracking, not with mercy, not with kindness, but with war. He was no longer just a pet. He was a flame, and soon he would burn brighter than all their banners. The fire beneath the glass. The palace had never known silence. Its walls thrummed with energy, its corridors sang with the footsteps of servants, its skies bled with the sound of engines and ceremony. But when the Dominion struck, a new kind of silence descended, heavy, waiting, suffocating. It was not peace, nor was it calm. It was the silence before a storm breaks the world open. Saren felt it in his bones. He was 14 now, his frame wiry, his limbs stronger than the hollowed child who had once clung to life in a broken shell. His skin carried scars from palace games, his eyes a steel gray that no laughter could brighten. He walked unseen through the emperor's vast citadel, a shadow between the glass-blooded nobles, a reminder of fragility among those who believed themselves immortal. The nobles did not notice him watching. They never did. In the Hall of Stars, where admirals gathered beneath domes of projected galaxies, Saren crouched on the high lattice beams, invisible above the glow. Below him, fleets unfurled in simulation, elegant formations of silver spears, wings fanning like dancers across the void. Admirals debated with measured tones, arguing over vectors and velocity. Their words spilled like jewels, polished and precise. But Saren's eyes were not drawn to the beauty. They were drawn to the gaps. Every formation left its spine exposed. Every maneuver revealed the flaw of symmetry. It was a pattern repeated again and again, perfection that betrayed itself. He could see how a jagged thrust, a feint from shadow, a predator's lunge from angles too crude for the nobles to consider, could collapse the gleaming lattice of their strategy like shattered glass. He whispered to himself, though no one heard, "You fight like dancers, not hunters." The void does not forgive dancers. War crept closer. News poured into the palace like rivers of ash. Worlds burned. Stations fell. The Dominion's fleets moved not with art but with hunger, jagged lines surging like swarms of teeth. The Emperor's admirals, proud in their symmetry, shattered themselves against the storm. Reports arrived in black boxes, their last recordings filled with screams cut short. And still the nobles told themselves they were untouchable. They filled their nights with feasts, blinding themselves with music and light while Saren walked unnoticed through the edges of their revels. To them, he was background, Valyri's strange little relic, a creature too small to matter, but Valyri noticed. She saw how his eyes followed the star maps, how his fingers traced invisible lines of attack across the marble floors, how his body tensed when couriers whispered news of fleets destroyed. She saw him lean close to the transparent windows, staring not in awe at the Emperor's banners but in calculation. "You burn too fiercely, little flame," she murmured once, touching his shoulder. "Careful, fire draws eyes, and eyes bring chains." It was in the Garden of Blades that Saren first revealed himself. The garden was no true garden, but a ceremonial arena, a place of training where nobles' children sparred beneath crystalline trees. Their weapons, curved shards of living crystal, rang against one another in elegant patterns, each strike a performance rather than an act of survival. Saren often lurked among the shadows, watching, never invited. On that day, the children circled him. They had grown tired of treating him as pet. Boredom was cruelty's twin, and both ran strong in young veins. They taunted him, tossing down a practice blade, daring him to fight. He ignored them, retreating until one lashed out with a strike meant not to wound but to humiliate. Instinct took him. Saren moved, not like the dancers, not like the children of glass, but like prey that had lived too long under the hunter's gaze. His blade met theirs not in flourish but in necessity, striking angles they did not see, cutting patterns they did not know. Within breaths, one noble child lay sprawling, blade knocked from delicate fingers. Another fell with a cry of shock, weapon shattered against Saren's crude block. They had never been defeated by a pet. Their outrage carried to their tutors, to the courtiers, to the consort herself. Valerie silenced the scandal with a wave of her jeweled hand, but Saren's victory did not vanish. Whispers followed him now, not of pity, not of novelty, but of unease. Soon after, the war arrived in full. The Emperor summoned his fleets to the palace world. From the oceans rose carriers vast enough to blot the sky. From orbit descended dreadnoughts whose shadows stretched across continents. The very air trembled with engines, a chorus of war. The nobles gathered in the grand amphitheater of command, where the Emperor himself presided from a throne of obsidian flame. Saren, hidden in the upper reaches, watched with eyes wide. The Emperor's voice rolled like thunder, commanding strategy, assigning fleets, dividing responsibility among his sons and admirals. Pride gleamed in their crystalline eyes. Confidence dripped from their lips. But Saren saw only dancers preparing their final act. The Dravathi were hunters. The Empire did not yet understand. It was that night Valerie found him awake, tracing battle lines with stones in the dust of the servants' courtyard. She stood behind him, silent at first, watching how he moved the pieces. "You see something," she said finally. Saren froze, his hand hovering above the dust. "They will die," he whispered. Valerie crouched beside him, her gown of liquid glass spilling across the dirt.
"Who will die, little flame?"
"All of them." His voice trembled, not with fear, but with certainty. "They fight the wrong way. They show themselves. They move where hunters can see. The Dominion will break them like dry bone." Valerie's crystalline eyes narrowed. "How do you know this?" Saren did not answer. How could he? He only knew. His bones told him, his blood told him, the memory of silence and wreckage told him. He had survived where others had not. He could see death before it struck. Valerie's hand touched his cheek. Cold, gentle. "Careful, Flame. A truth spoken too loud can ignite a pyre." Days later, the fleets launched. Saren watched from the high towers as rivers of fire bled into the stars. He clutched the railing until his knuckles whitened, whispering the flaws he saw in every formation. No one listened. No one would. He was a relic, a trinket, a pet. But when the first fleet returned broken, its banners burned, its admiral slain, whispers began. The boy had said it, the boy had known, and in the echo of defeat the Emperor's fleet turned its gaze, for the first time toward the orphan in its midst. The boy who saw the gaps the palace bled grief. When the first fleet limped home, its ships trailing smoke across the stars, the crystal avenues of the Emperor's world filled with silence again. Not the stillness of awe this time, but the choking hush of disbelief. Banners once radiant now fluttered in tatters. Soldiers staggered through the gates with hollow eyes, carrying fragments of shattered comrades in urns of glass. The nobles whispered. Some in outrage, others in fear. Never in living memory had a fleet of the Empire returned so broken, so humiliated. Saren did not whisper. He stared, he had said it. He had known, and now the knowledge lay on the stones before him, painted in blood and ash. Valerie watched him closely. She knew his silence was not born of fear nor arrogance. It was born of recognition, that what he carried inside was not chance but something deeper, something dangerous. The Emperor summoned his council of war. The Hall of Stars glowed with maps of the contested belt, lines of fire marking fallen sectors. Admirals stood arrayed in their jeweled armor, their crystalline bodies refracting light like prisms. The Emperor himself, taller than any, his form cut from obsidian light, presided at the heart of it all. His voice was iron and flame as he demanded answers. The nobles argued, each blaming another, each insisting their strategies had been sound. They adjusted their simulations, shifting lines, redrawing arcs. But Saren, watching unseen from the rafters, saw the same flaw repeated. Perfect symmetry. Perfect failure. The hunters would tear them apart again. It was Valyrie who brought him forward. She entered the chamber with the quiet grace of a shadow, her jeweled gown whispering across the floor. At her side walked Saren, barefoot, small, a child dwarfed by the titans of command. Gasps rippled through the council. What is this? One admiral hissed. A plaything in the hall of strategy? A consort's indulgence? Another sneered. Valyrie did not bow. She lifted her chin and said, This boy saw the fall before it came. He saw what you did not. If he can see again, will you turn your eyes away? The Emperor's gaze turned to Saren. Those black fire eyes pierced through him like blades, weighing not the boy's flesh but the flame within. You claim to see? The Emperor asked, his voice thunder rolling. Saren's throat tightened. Every noble eye burned into him, their contempt sharp as knives. But he stepped forward toward the shimmering maps. His small hand reached up, tracing a jagged arc across the stars. They will strike here, he said, his voice steady despite the tremor in his chest. Not where you watch. You are too clean, too ordered. They will come like knives from the dark. You will think your formation unbreakable until it shatters. The hall erupted in laughter. A child's rambling. Valyrie's pet playing at general. An orphan of ash teaching warriors of flame? But the Emperor did not laugh. His gaze lingered on Saren's trembling hand, on the jagged lines that marred the perfect geometry of the Admiral's maps. There was something in it, something he could not name but could not dismiss. Enough, the Emperor rumbled. We test him. The test came swiftly. They brought Saren to the simulacrum chamber where fleets of light clashed in projected voids large enough to swallow cities. Admirals stood in balconies watching as Saren was given control of a mock Dominion fleet. Against him, a young noble commanded a formation of the Emperor's ships crafted in flawless symmetry. It was meant to humiliate him, but Saren did not move as the nobles did. He did not arrange his ships in elegant lines or mirrored wings. He scattered them, jagged, uneven, like stones thrown across a river. The nobles laughed at the disorder, shaking their heads at the crude mess of it. Then Saren struck. He feinted with clumsy thrusts, baiting the nobles' perfect formation into overreach. He lunged from shadows, breaking symmetry with chaos. He attacked not where honor dictated, but where hunger demanded. Within breaths, the nobles' fleet shattered, lines broken, ships scattered. The hall fell silent. Even the laughter died. The Emperor leaned forward in his throne of light, eyes like burning voids. For the first time, Saren saw something in them that was not contempt. It was curiosity, but curiosity is a blade with two edges. From that day, Saren's name spread through the palace. Some whispered it as prophecy, the orphan who saw the gaps, the flame in the ash. Others spoke it as blasphemy, a pet daring to mock nobility, a child unworthy of command. The nobles despised him. They plotted, they sneered, they sought to break him with tests of cruelty. Yet Saren endured, not because Valyrie shielded him, but because instinct sharpened him. Every insult, every scheme became another lesson. He learned how to read faces as he read star maps, how to see weakness behind jeweled smiles. And slowly, the Emperor watched. Saren was not yet given command, but he was allowed to stand in the halls of war, to trace his crude lines across the stars, to speak when spoken to. A shadow among giants, but a shadow they could not ignore. War raged beyond the palace. The Dominion struck harder, faster, bolder. Worlds fell in days. Imperial fleets bled. The nobles' confidence cracked. And in the cracks, Saren's voice began to slip through. Once, during a heated council, Saren interrupted an admiral's speech, his voice cutting sharp across the chamber. They will not come from where you look. They will circle. They will bite your tail before you strike your prey. The admiral spat fury, but the Emperor silenced him with a gesture. Hours later, reports arrived. The Dominion had indeed struck from behind, exactly as Saren had warned. The council murmured. The laughter grew fewer. Valyri remained his only sanctuary. At night, in her chambers of flowing glass and shadowed light, Saren would collapse from exhaustion, his mind still whirring with patterns of war. Valyri would brush the sweat from his brow, whispering, "Careful, Flame. The brighter you burn, the faster they will try to snuff you out," Saren whispered back. "Then let them try." Valyri's crystalline eyes glimmered with sorrow. She knew the boy she had saved was no longer merely her foundling. He was becoming something else, something the Empire might use, or fear or destroy. The turning point came with the siege of Calreth, a jewel world near the Dominion frontier. The Emperor's admirals, proud and unyielding, prepared to march in their flawless lines once more. But Saren saw the trap before it was sprung. He begged Valyri to take him to the Emperor. She hesitated, then relented. Together they stood before the throne. Saren fell to his knees. "They want you at Calreth," he cried, "not because it is rich, but because it is bait. They will circle you there. They will cut your fleet in two and crush you against the planet's gravity well." The chamber went still. The Emperor's eyes smoldered, unreadable. The admirals protested in fury. But something in the boy's voice, something raw, something carved from the silence of loss, pierced deeper than all their polished words. The Emperor rose. His voice was iron. "Then the orphan shall ride with the fleet. If his fire is false, it will burn out in battle. If it is true—" The silence swallowed his words, but Saren understood. The cage of glass was breaking. For the first time he would see war not as a shadow in the rafters, but from the heart of the storm. Baptism in fire. The fleet that gathered for Calreth was a storm given shape. From the oceans of the Emperor's world rose carriers vast enough to cast shadows over continents. From the orbital docks descended dreadnoughts, their hulls glowing with runes of authority, each one a cathedral of war. The skies churned with thousands of silver spears. Banners ignited in rivers of fire as they aligned for departure. Saren stood among them, a single boy swallowed by the enormity of it all. He had never left the palace since the day he was rescued from the wreckage. Now dressed in a simple cadet's garb Valyri had pressed into his hands, he walked the causeways of Titans. Soldiers towered over him in crystalline armor, their faces carved with discipline and contempt. They stared at him as if a stray dog had wandered into a temple. "The orphan," he heard one murmur. "Valyri's toy," said another. "A child dragged to war as a jest." But Saren's gaze did not falter. He had known scorn all his life. What weighed on him now was not their contempt. It was the fire in his veins, the whisper of instinct that told him he was walking toward the place he was meant to be. The flagship of the Calreth Armada was the Obsidian Crown, a fortress of black crystal that seemed less built than carved from the void itself. Its halls gleamed with authority. Its command chamber pulsed with light from a map that stretched across entire sectors. Here Saren was brought before Lord Admiral Thorix, commander of the Calreth campaign. His form was angular even among his kind, his face sharp as a blade. He looked at Saren with the same expression he would give an insect on the floor. "This," Thorix sneered to Valyri, "is the miracle boy? The whisper in the rafters? You insult me, consort." Valyri's jeweled eyes were steady. "You would insult the Emperor's will, Admiral?" He ordered the boy ride with the fleet. Thorix's lips thinned. His pride bowed, but his fury did not. He turned to Saren. "You will sit in silence. You will not touch the boards. You will not speak unless bidden. Fail and you will burn with the rest." Saren bowed his head, but inside he was already tracing lines across the stars. The fleet burned toward Calreth in perfect formation. Rows of mirrored wings spread across the void like dancers in flawless rhythm. Dreadnoughts formed unbroken lines. Carriers held the rear in immaculate symmetry. To Saren, watching from the raised platform of the command chamber, it was beautiful. Too beautiful. The Dominion would not fight beauty. They would tear beauty apart. He said nothing. Not yet. The Admiral's eyes bored into him like knives. Waiting for the orphan to humiliate himself, Saren clenched his fists and waited. Calreth rose before them, a jewel world of sapphire oceans and green continents glittering with cities. Around it swarmed the Dominion's vanguard, black leviathans bristling with jagged metal, their formations ugly, uneven, like beasts gathering to feed. The Admiral's voice rang sharp. "Advance in the Emperor's pattern. Break their line, sweep the flanks, cut them to ash." The fleet obeyed. Silver wings surged forward in radiant arcs. Cannons ignited, filling the void with light. For a heartbeat, Saren felt awe. War was not ceremony here. It was thunder, fire, a storm of collapsing stars. And then he saw it. The gap. The Dominion ships fell back, retreating not in panic but in lure. The Imperial wings pressed forward, eager, proud, chasing into the teeth of the trap. Saren's breath caught. His instincts screamed. He could see the jaws closing, jagged ships curving wide, circling behind, angling for the fleet's tail. "They're baiting you," Saren cried. His voice cracked across the chamber, thin against the roar of cannons. "They'll circle and cut us in two. Pull back." The council erupted in laughter. Admirals sneered. Officers scoffed. Thorix's face twisted in rage. "Silence, pet. This is war, not a child's game." But Saren's voice rose, desperate. "I've seen this. I've seen it before. They'll crush us against the gravity well." And then the jaws snapped shut. From the darkness surged Dominion warships, dozens of them, their jagged hulls vomiting fire. They struck the Imperial rear with savage precision, severing the wings from the carriers. The fleet's perfect symmetry shattered. Silver ships spun in chaos, banners burning, formations collapsing. The command chamber erupted in shouts. Admirals barked orders, officers scrambled, the map filled with red. Saren did not move. His eyes burned with clarity. He saw not the chaos but the path. He saw where the fleet could pivot, where the Dominion overextended, where hunters could become prey. His small hand darted to the map. He dragged a jagged line across the stars. "Strike here! Collapse the flank, push them into the well instead. Use their own trap against them." Thorix's hand shot out, seizing his wrist. The Admiral's crystalline grip cut like ice. "You dare— Look!" Saren screamed, his voice breaking with fury. "Look before it's too late." The Emperor's seal burned suddenly across the chamber wall. A live projection of his obsidian face filled the room. His voice rolled like thunder. "Let him speak." The chamber froze. Thorix released Saren's wrist as if burned. The boy, trembling, drew his crude lines again. "They've cut us, but their flank is open. If we swing the rear here—" His fingers traced the jagged arc. "We push them against the gravity well. They'll choke themselves on their own net." Silence. The map flickered. The officers stared. The Emperor's voice rumbled. "Do it." The orders went out. Reluctant, furious, the admirals relayed commands. Ships pivoted, battered wings folding into jagged thrusts. The Dominion surged, confident in their trap, until the trap reversed. The Imperial fleet drove hard into their overextended flank, hammering them toward Calreth's gravity well. One by one, the jagged leviathans were dragged down, engines screaming against the pull, hulls tearing apart as they fell into the planet's blue fire, the void lit with ruin. What had been slaughter became victory. When the last Dominion ship fell, the fleet roared with triumph. But in the command chamber, silence reigned. Every admiral stared at the boy, no longer with contempt, but with something colder. Recognition. Saren stood trembling, his chest heaving, his eyes wide. He had spoken against them, defied them, and turned the tide. But he could see it in their faces. They would never forgive him. Only the Emperor's voice broke the silence. "The flame burns true." The projection faded. That night, as Saren lay in his narrow bunk aboard the Obsidian Crown, sleep would not come. He stared at the metal above him, hearing echoes of fire, seeing again the jaws of the trap. He knew this was only the beginning. Valyrie came to him, her jeweled presence soft in the dim light. She touched his hair, her voice heavy with warning. "You saved them, little flame, but now you are more dangerous than ever. To the Dominion, and to the Empire." Saren closed his eyes. He already knew he was no longer a pet, no longer an orphan hiding in shadows. He was a weapon, and weapons in the Emperor's fleet were never free. The blade in the shadows, victory at Calreth, carried the fleet home in rivers of fire. Banners lit the skies of the Emperor's world. Songs of triumph poured through the avenues, and the people raised their crystal voices in praise. The Dominion had been broken, their trap undone, their leviathans dragged screaming into the sapphire depths of their own lure. To the common soldier, it was a miracle. To the courtiers, it was a reprieve. To the Emperor, it was proof, but to the nobles, it was an insult. For Saren's name clung to the victory like smoke. Whispers spread through the palace like wildfire. The orphan saw what the admirals did not. The pet saved the fleet. The boy turned the tide. Each retelling sharpened their shame. The emperor summoned Saren to the Hall of Flame, where only those who bore banners were allowed. Saren entered barefoot, clad in the simple garb of a cadet, dwarfed by columns that soared like mountains. At the end of the hall, the emperor sat upon his throne of obsidian fire, his form wreathed in the shifting glow of stars. "Approach," his voice rumbled, deeper than thunder. Saren walked forward, his steps echoing. He knelt at the base of the throne, heart pounding like drums. "You were flame in the ash," the emperor said. "You saw what they could not. You turned death into fire." Saren raised his eyes, but dared no words. "From this day," the emperor continued, "you will no longer sit in rafters or shadows. You will stand among the councils of war. You will bear no banner, for you have no bloodline. But your flame shall guide those who do." Gasps rippled through the court. To elevate a human orphan into the war councils was unthinkable. Yet the emperor's decree was iron, unshakable. Saren was no longer pet, no longer relic. He was advisor of flame, and in that moment, Saren felt chains settle on his shoulders heavier than any collar he had ever worn. The weeks that followed transformed his life. By day, Saren stood in chambers of strategy, tracing jagged arcs across maps, his voice cutting through the polished speeches of admirals. By night, he studied endlessly, memorizing the emperor's campaigns, dissecting every Dominion maneuver, training his mind to see patterns before they formed. Sleep became rare, hunger a whisper. His whole being bent toward the fire of war, but hatred bent toward him in equal measure. The nobles smiled with their lips, but not their eyes. They draped him in silks for feasts, paraded him as the emperor's curiosity, while behind jeweled doors they plotted. They mocked him in whispers, a stray dressed in glass, a mongrel among lions. Once, Saren returned to his quarters to find the walls scrawled with symbols of scorn, his bed soaked with acid that ate through the sheets. Another night, a duel was staged in the Garden of Blades, a noble youth forcing Saren into combat with a live blade instead of practiced steel. Saren fought not with elegance but with survival, disarming his opponent with a strike so crude it shattered the blade's edge. His victory silenced the crowd but only deepened their fury. Valyri warned him each night, "Careful, flame. The brighter you burn, the darker their envy grows." Saren only whispered back, then let them choke on it. It was in the Council of War that Saren first locked horns with Admiral Thorax. The council chamber pulsed with maps of the contested sectors. The Dominion had regrouped, pushing toward the mineral fields of Nerith. Admirals argued for a frontal strike, their voices sharp and assured. Saren studied the map, the fire in his veins whispering its truth. "They want you to strike the front," he said. His voice carried, though soft. "They want you blind. Their true thrust is here." His finger traced an arc through a belt of shattered moons, a path no imperial fleet would ever travel. The chamber erupted in scoffs. "No fleet could pass through that wreckage," Thorax barked. "Only a fool would suggest it." Saren's gray eyes met his. "Hunters are fools until the prey is dead." The silence that followed was sharp as glass. The Emperor's gaze lingered on Saren, then turned to the admirals. "Send scouts. If the orphan is wrong, he will kneel in chains. If he is right," his voice darkened, "you will kneel instead." Days later, the scouts returned. Dominion ships had indeed passed through the shattered moons, positioning for a strike against the Imperial flank. Saren's words had been true. The Emperor's wrath fell on the admirals, their pride stripped, their banners dimmed. Thorax bowed stiffly, but his crystalline eyes burned with hatred. Saren knew then, the man would not rest until the flame was snuffed. Despite the enemies gathering in shadows, Saren's influence grew. Soldiers began to whisper his name with respect. The orphan who sees the hunters, the advisor of flame. They looked to him not as noble or blooded, but as survivor, one who understood war not as art, but as fire. He trained with them in the yards, his body hardening, his movements stripped of palace softness. They taught him to wield the crystal blade, but Saren bent it to his own rhythm, a blend of predator and prey. He was no dancer. He was a scar sharpened into steel, yet each victory, each recognition, carved him deeper into the Emperor's chains. For every word he spoke in the War Council, every plan that turned death into triumph, Saren felt himself becoming less boy, more weapon. The palace no longer laughed at him, but it no longer saw him as human either. He was flame. And flame was to be used, not cherished. The Dominion struck again. At Nareth, their swarm poured through the shattered moons as Saren had predicted. The Emperor's fleets forewarned encircled them in a net of fire. The battle raged for 3 days, the void filled with screams and ruin. Saren stood at the Emperor's side, his crude arcs guiding maneuvers that cut the hunters into pieces. Victory came again, but Saren did not rejoice. His hands shook as he watched ships burn, not with awe but with memory. He remembered the wreckage where he had been found, the silence of bodies drifting cold. He remembered that war had made him orphan once, and now it made him weapon. Valyrie found him alone after the battle, his eyes hollow. "You carry too much flame," she whispered. Saren looked at her with tired eyes. "I carry what they will not." Her jeweled fingers touched his cheek. "And one day it will break you." Back in the palace, feasts were held in his honor. Nobles raised crystal cups, toasting the boy they once mocked. But Saren saw the truth in their eyes. Their smiles were knives, their praises poison. In a corner of the hall, Thorix watched him with a predator's patience. The Admiral's voice, low and venomous, carried only to those closest. "He thinks himself flame, but all flames die. All flames can be smothered." And Saren, though he could not hear, felt the chill of that promise settle over him. The war had proven his worth. Now the true battle, the battle for his very survival in the Emperor's world, was about to begin. Shadows in the glass the palace feasts ended, but their echoes lingered like smoke in Saren's mind. He had stood at the Emperor's side, bathed in praise, every eye upon him. Yet the warmth of fire was not what he carried back to his chambers. It was the cold of glances that slid too smoothly away, of smiles that tightened like snares, of voices pitched sweet but coiled with venom. Saren had grown up knowing hunger, knowing loneliness, but now he tasted a sharper poison. Envy and envy in the palace of glass. Killed. The first blade came at night. Saren's quarters overlooked the spire gardens, where silver flowers pulsed with their eerie glow. He had just extinguished the lanterns when he felt it. A silence too deep, a breath that did not belong. He moved without thought, years of survival and wreckage guiding him. The dagger missed his throat by inches, cutting only the pillow where his head had been. Saren twisted, caught the assailant's wrist and slammed the figure against the crystal wall. The mask shattered, a palace guard, eyes burning with shame. "Why?" Saren hissed, blade now in his hand. But the guard spat blood and whispered, "The mongrel does not belong." Then he wrenched his own throat against the blade, ending his life before Saren could ask more. Blood stained the silken floor. Saren stared at it not with horror, but with the bitter clarity of knowing this was only the beginning. The Emperor did not summon him for 3 days. When he finally did, it was not to reprimand, but to test. "Survival marks the strong," the Emperor said, voice deep as storms. "But strength is not survival alone. Tell me, Flame, how will you burn when the fire is turned inward?" Saren bowed, hiding the tremor in his hands. "Then I burn brighter, so none can choke it out." The Emperor's obsidian gaze lingered on him, unreadable. "See that you do." The audience ended, but Saren understood the truth. The Emperor would not shield him. He was weapon, not son. If the nobles wanted him broken, the Emperor would only watch to see if his flame endured. The second strike was subtler. During a council meeting, Saren's water was laced with a shimmering toxin. Valyrie, ever watchful, caught the glint too late. Saren drank, felt the fire coil in his veins, a heat that seared from within. He staggered but did not fall. Hours later, writhing in his chamber, he forced the poison out the way he had once forced rot water from his body as a child in the wreckage. He survived, barely. When he returned to the council days later, pale and unsteady, whispers filled the chamber. Yet Saren stood, voice steady as he traced arcs of war upon the map. His weakness was hidden behind the fire of certainty. And though he lived, he carried the bitter lesson. The palace would never face him openly. They would bleed him slowly until no flame remained. Valyrie became his only ally. Each night she sat in his chamber, weaving jewels into threads that shimmered with light, her fingers moving like music. "They will not stop," she said. "I know. You are a thorn in their flesh. You shame them each time you breathe." Saren's gaze lingered on the stars beyond the crystal windows. "Then I'll keep breathing until they choke." Her jeweled hand touched his arm, tender despite the cold glitter of her rank. "Be careful, Flame. Fire consumes not only its enemies but itself." Saren wanted to answer, but words failed. For the first time since the Emperor had lifted him from the wreckage, Saren wondered if the blaze inside him was not strength, but doom. The third strike came clothed as honor. Admiral Thorix, ever patient, proposed a demonstration in the arena of blades. It was tradition, officers testing skill before the court, a display of elegance and discipline. Saren could not refuse without insult. The arena blazed with light, nobles filling the tiers, their crystalline eyes gleaming with hunger. Saren entered in simple training garb, blade in hand. Across from him stood not a cadet, but Thorix's own champion, an armored veteran towering, his blade gleaming with serrated crystal edges. The duel began with ceremony. It ended in blood. The champion struck like thunder, each blow designed not to test but to kill. Saren dodged, parried, his body moving with the raw instinct of a survivor, not the grace of a duelist. The crowd jeered, mocking his crude movements. But survival cared nothing for grace. Saren twisted, ducked under a killing arc, and drove his blade into the gap beneath the champion's arm. The veteran staggered, blood pouring, collapsing to the arena floor. Silence filled the tiers. Saren stood over the fallen man, chest heaving, eyes blazing with something primal. He raised his blade high, not in salute but in warning, and the crowd knew then, the orphan would not die quietly. The Emperor's laughter rolled through the arena, deep and terrible. "The flame devours even steel," he declared. The nobles applauded, their smiles thin, their eyes colder than ever. Saren's survival had not cowed them. It had only deepened the hunger to see him extinguished. Thorix, from across the arena, met Saren's gaze. His crystalline eyes burned with hatred that was patient, deliberate. Saren knew then that the Admiral's plots were far from finished. That night, Saren could not sleep. He stood on the balcony, looking down at the spire gardens glowing like a sea of stars. His body ached, scars burning, his mind restless. The victories meant nothing. The nobles would never see him as one of them, no matter how many battles he won or blades he survived, and yet, Saren realized that was his strength. He was not born of their banners, their silks, their traditions. He was born of wreckage and hunger, of instinct honed in the silence of death. They called him mongrel pet flame, but Saren knew the truth. He was something they could never be, a creature of survival. And survival was sharper than any blade. But as dawn broke, a shadow crossed the sky, the Dominion fleet. Their banners had reappeared in strength, sweeping across contested space with fire and fury. War was rising again, and Saren knew the palace's games were only a prelude. The true test was coming, one that would decide not only whether Saren lived, but whether the Emperor's fleet would endure or burn. Fire on two fronts. The Dominion came like a tide of black suns. Their war banners, vast and cold, blotted the stars, fleets spreading across the void like a storm of knives. The Emperor's courtiers called them a rabble, but Saren knew better. He saw their lines, their coils, the patient way they circled prey. It was not chaos. It was hunger. And hunger was the one language Saren understood better than any admiral. The Council of War gathered in the flame chamber. Maps of stars flickered across the glass floor, constellations breaking apart as Dominion movements burned into view. Admirals spoke of frontal strikes, of hammer blows to crush the invaders before they took root. Their voices carried certainty, sharpened by pride. Saren stood silent, watching the flow of enemy fleets. He traced them not as lines of battle, but as a predator's hunt. His stomach knotted. The Dominion was not striking forward, they were feigning. Their jaws were waiting in the dark, hidden behind the fronts they offered so willingly. When the Emperor finally turned to him, Saren's voice cut through the chamber. "They want you to charge," he said softly, "but their true trap is here." His finger drew an arc along the Nebris Veil, a stretch of stars so thick with nebulae that no sane commander would risk a fleet within. Admiral Thorix scoffed, his crystalline eyes flashing. "Again the mongrel speaks of ghosts. The nebula is death to navigation. No fleet could lie within." Saren met his gaze with fire. "Which is why it is perfect. No one looks where no one dares to go." The chamber shifted uneasily. The Emperor's gaze fell heavy as iron. "You are certain?" Saren did not blink. "As certain as I was at Nereth, as I was at Calreth. If you strike their front, you will be devoured." Silence lingered. Then the Emperor rose, fire wreathing his form. Then we will strike where they hide, he thundered. The flame follows the orphan's sight. Gasps broke across the court. Saren had swayed the fleet again, and Thorix's silence was a blade Saren could feel pressing against his back. The fleet departed within the span of 3 days. Saren stood aboard the Emperor's flagship, the Obsidian Flame, its hull carved from black crystal and starfire. War banners rippled across space as thousands of ships aligned, their engines roaring like storms. Ahead, the nebula stretched vast and glowing, a wound of crimson and violet gas twisting through the void. The Emperor stood at the prow, arms crossed, his voice low as he addressed Saren. "If you are wrong, Flame, we will be ash in the veil." Saren's reply came steady, though his heart thundered. "Then I pray I have not learned the wrong language of hunger." They entered the veil. The gas cloud swallowed the fleet, turning sensors blind, stars vanishing behind curtains of shifting fire. Colors bled through the hull, violet lightning, crimson storms. The silence was suffocating. Crews shifted nervously, their breaths caught in throats. Then it came, a ripple, a shadow. And from the depths of the nebula, the Dominion fleet unfurled like a nightmare. Vast leviathans of black steel poured from the clouds, their engines masked until now. They surged forward, jaws opening, cannons blazing with fire that turned the veil into a storm of light. The trap was sprung. Yet it was the Dominion who found prey waiting. The Emperor's fleet roared to life, banners blazing. "Burn them," the Emperor thundered. The void exploded. Saren was fire and instinct, his mind alive with arcs and counters. He guided the fleet through chaos, weaving them between Dominion salvos, driving wedges where gaps appeared. He was no admiral in the polished sense. He shouted orders crude and sharp, based on hunger and survival. But the soldiers responded. They felt his certainty. Where the nobles hesitated, Saren struck. Where the Dominion closed jaws, Saren slipped the fleet through the teeth. It was slaughter, but it was not victory yet. The Dominion's leviathans pressed harder, their sheer weight threatening to crush the fleet even as Saren turned trap into counter-trap. Hours bled into endless fire. Saren's throat burned, his body trembling with exhaustion, but his mind refused to dim. And all the while, he felt another presence, the gaze of Thorix watching, waiting. The betrayal came at the battle's height. Saren had just ordered a flanking strike that split a Dominion spearhead when alarms flared across the Obsidian Flame. Systems failed, shields flickered, engines stuttered. Saren's gut twisted. This was no enemy strike. It was sabotage. The flagship buckled as Dominion fire tore into its weakened flank. Crew screamed. Flames burst through the command deck. Saren staggered, choking on smoke, his instincts screaming louder than thought. Someone had cut the ship's heart open. Through the haze, Saren caught sight of movement. Palace guards, their blades drawn, eyes burning with betrayal. They struck not at Dominion, but at Saren. The conspiracy had chosen its moment. Chaos became intimate. Saren fought not with elegance, but with desperation, grabbing a fallen blade, parrying strikes that came fast and merciless. Each guard was trained, armored, certain in their kill. But Saren was not certain, he was desperate. And desperation cut deeper than pride. He ducked under a killing blow, drove his blade into a guard's gut, twisted it free before another strike could land. He used every scrap of instinct, every lesson of hunger. By the time the Emperor's loyalists stormed in, the floor was slick with blood. Saren stood amid it, chest heaving, face streaked with soot and sweat. The Emperor emerged through the smoke, eyes blazing like suns. He looked at Saren, then at the corpses. He said nothing, but his silence was heavier than words. The battle raged still outside. Saren dragged himself back to the strategy table, blood on his hands, vision swimming. He forced his mind to focus, to see the arcs, the flows. The Dominion pressed harder, sensing weakness, but Saren burned brighter. "Here," he rasped, drawing a jagged line. "Cut them here and the rest will fold." The Emperor gave the order. The fleet struck, and like glass under hammer, the Dominion line shattered. Their leviathans broke, their formations crumbled, their banners burned in the void. The Dominion retreated, limping into the dark. The Emperor's fleet had survived, but Saren did not feel triumph. As the fleet roared in victory, he sat slumped against the crystal wall, blood drying on his skin. His hands trembled, not from battle, but from betrayal. He had fought Dominion and nobles alike in the same hour, and though he lived, Saren knew the truth. The Emperor's silence was not protection. The conspirators would strike again. and one day Saren might not be strong enough to burn brighter. Far above the smoking battlefield, Admiral Thorax stood aboard his own ship, untouched, pristine. His crystalline gaze lingered on the Emperor's flagship where Saren yet lived. His jaw tightened. "This flame," he muttered, "will not burn forever." His hand closed into a fist. Plans already shifted in his mind. The orphan had survived the veil, but survival was only the beginning of a much deadlier fire. Trial by fire, the fleet returned to the Emperor's world not in triumph but in uneasy silence. Banners fluttered, songs rose, but Saren felt none of it. He walked the palace halls with the Dominion's fire still etched in his skin, the stink of blood in his memory. Yet the whispers in the corridors stung sharper than battle. The mongrel sabotaged the flagship. The mongrel plotted his own victory. The mongrel kills his own to rise higher. Poison spread faster than truth, and Saren knew whose hand guided it. Admiral Thorax's, patient as ever. The summons came swiftly. The Council of Flame gathered in the tribunal chamber, a hall ringed by obsidian spires that pulsed with heat. Nobles filled the tiers, their jeweled robes gleaming like fire. The Emperor sat at the apex, his form shadowed in burning light. Saren stood below, stripped of his advisor's cloak, clad only in the plain garb of an orphan once more. The charges rang out, cold and sharp. Sabotage of the obsidian flame. Treachery. The deaths of loyal guards. The nobles cried for justice, their voices echoing like a storm of knives. Saren raised his head, his voice steady despite the weight of every gaze. "I did not betray the fleet. I saved it. The guards who died did not come for the Dominion. They came for me." Laughter rippled through the chamber. "And who would believe the word of an orphan?" Thorax said, stepping into the circle, his crystalline eyes gleaming. "A creature with no bloodline, no oath, no honor." His words struck deep, and Saren felt the tide of the council turning against him. But before Saren could reply, Valyrie rose. She was a vision of jewels and fire, her voice clear as crystal. "I believe him," she declared, "because I know the venom in these halls. I have seen envy sharper than blades. You call him mongrel, yet twice he has saved you from ruin. Do you spit on flame because it burns brighter than your own?" Gasps filled the chamber. To defend Saren so openly was to risk her own standing. Yet Valyrie's defiance lit a spark Saren felt deep within. Still the nobles pressed harder. "If he is innocent," Thorax said smoothly, "let him prove it. Let him stand not with words but with fire." A murmur swept the chamber. Saren understood at once. They meant the trial of blades, a ritual of blood where accusations were settled by combat. It was no duel of honor. It was execution dressed as tradition. The Emperor's gaze burned into Saren. "Do you accept?" Saren's heart thundered. Refusal meant guilt. Acceptance meant almost certain death. "I accept," Saren said. His voice did not waver. The arena of the trial was older than the palace itself. Carved into the mountain's heart, it glowed with rivers of molten fire, its floor a circle of scorched stone. Nobles filled the terraces, their eyes gleaming, hungry for spectacle. Saren entered with no banner, no colors, only a blade of crystal pressed into his hand. Across the circle stood his challenger, not Thorax himself, but another champion. Larger, armored, a war beast bred for killing. The signal flared. The champion struck with thunder, each blow raining sparks, his strength overwhelming. Saren dodged, parried, his body screaming with the memory of every battle survived. He fought not with elegance, but with the raw, desperate rhythm of a child who had once scavenged among corpses, who had learned that hesitation was death. The crowd jeered, then hushed. For though Saren staggered, he did not fall. Though his blade chipped, he struck back. Though blood streamed from his arm, his eyes burned brighter. At last Saren twisted beneath a killing strike, driving his blade upward into the beast's throat. The champion fell choking, blood sizzling on the hot stone. The arena went silent. Saren stood swaying, breath ragged, blade slick with red. His victory was undeniable. But so too was his isolation. The Emperor's voice rolled through the silence. "The flame survives. The charges are ash." The nobles bowed, their mouths silent, but their eyes burning with hatred sharper than ever. Saren had not only survived the trial, he had humiliated them again. And Thorax, watching from the shadows of the terrace, smiled. Not with defeat, but with satisfaction, because Saren understood too late. The trial had never been meant to kill him outright. It had been meant to harden him, to burn him further into the Emperor's weapon. Every survival chained him tighter to the throne. After the trial, Valeri found him alone, sitting by the molten rivers, his blade cooling beside him. "They will not stop," she whispered. "I know. Each time you live, you grow stronger, but each time they hate you more." Saren stared into the molten glow, his reflection warped in fire. "Then let them hate. Hate has never killed me yet." Valeri touched his hand, her jeweled fingers trembling. "But one day it will." News came swiftly after. The Dominion was not broken. Their defeat in the Veil had been only a wound. Now they surged again, fiercer, driving toward the Emperor's core worlds. The fleet would sail once more. And this time, Saren was not merely advisor. The Emperor, before the council, placed a banner in his hands, a banner not of blood but of fire. Forged new. "You will command," the Emperor declared, not as mongrel, not as pet, but as flame. The nobles' gasps filled the chamber. Saren stood trembling, the weight of the banner burning in his hands. Command meant power, but also exposure. He would lead men into war, and every noble would pray for his failure. War without, war within, both fires closing around him. And Saren, the orphan once left for dead, stepped into the inferno. The ashen banner. The day Saren took command, the skies of the Emperor's world burned with banners. From the high towers of obsidian, the people gathered to watch the fleets depart. Sleek war vessels hung suspended in the atmosphere like shards of midnight glass, their engines glowing with veins of molten fire. From the balcony, Saren stood with the banner in his grip, the fabric pulsing faintly with threads of living flame, a sigil not inherited, but forged. The nobles watched from their terraces, their jeweled eyes hard with disdain. To them, Saren's command was not honor but blasphemy, a mongrel orphan standing among the bloodlines of centuries. Yet the Emperor's decree was law. The fleet bent knee to him, and Saren felt the weight of 1,000 lives settle upon his shoulders. His flagship, the Ember Crown, awaited him. When he first stepped into its command chamber, silence fell. Officers turned their gazes, some with respect, others with open scorn. He saw it in their eyes, the split between those who believed his victories were chance and those who had begun to whisper his name as omen. He spoke no grand speech. "Only one sentence: we burn together or we fall as ash." The words echoed, simple, brutal, true. The Dominion's return had been swift and merciless. Entire border colonies had gone dark. Rumors whispered of Dominion ships splitting moons apart to deny the Emperor's forces resources. The enemy had learned from Saren's tactics and adapted. Now, Saren's fleet was ordered to hold the line at the Korath Rift, a stretch of broken space where gravity tore at vessels like invisible claws. Few commanders volunteered for it. The rift was graveyard and battlefield alike, but Saren did not flinch. The rift was chaos, and in chaos instinct thrived. The voyage was long, heavy with unease. Saren felt eyes on him at every turn. Some officers obeyed his commands with clipped precision. Others dragged their feet, testing the limits of his patience. And in the nights when the stars burned cold, he sensed something darker. Orders twisted in transmission. Reports misplaced. A subtle, invisible sabotage. Thorix's hand reached even here. Valeri had warned him. They will not stop. Now Saren lived that truth with every breath. He could not simply fight the Dominion. He would have to root out the rot within his own command. The rift welcomed them with silence. Jagged asteroids spun through black voids, their surfaces glowing faintly with strange radiation. Shattered ships drifted like ghosts, hulls broken, crew long dead. And beneath it all, the rift's gravity shifted endlessly, tugging, twisting, dragging at Saren's fleet. The officers watched Saren closely as he gave orders. His mind danced with instinct, but this time, instinct alone was not enough. He could not fight as a lone survivor clawing through ruins. He had to lead. "Hold formations loose," he ordered. "Let the rift breathe. Do not resist its pull, ride it. Flow with it like ash and fire." The fleet obeyed, though some voices whispered doubt. Slowly, vessels spread, their hulls weaving with the rift's unseen tides instead of straining against them. Saren watched, breath tight, and to his relief, the ships endured. They glided with the rift instead of shattering against it. Whispers turned quieter. A few officers even nodded grudgingly. Then came the Dominion. They emerged from the rift's shadows, ships vast and spined, their engines glowing sickly green. Not in formation, but in a swarm, like predators drawn by blood. Saren felt his chest tighten. The noble's trap had worked too well. His fleet was outnumbered, caught in a killing ground, but fear did not rule him. He remembered the streets of his childhood, the alleys where hunger drove him to steal, the nights when he hid from gangs, the moments where survival meant seeing angles others ignored. And suddenly, he saw the rift not as danger but as weapon. "Break the line," he ordered. "Bait them into the current. Let the rift tear at them." His officers hesitated. To scatter in the face of a swarm was madness. But Saren's voice cracked like iron. "Do it, now." The Dominion surged, chasing what they thought was panic. Their ships darted between rocks and currents, hungry to crush the disarrayed fleet. And then the rift's gravity shifted. Asteroids slammed into their hulls, dragged by invisible tides. Ships collided, wings ripped apart, engines spiraled out of control. The swarm dissolved into chaos. Saren's fleet, flowing with the rift as he had ordered, turned like hunters circling prey. Their fire lanced through the void, burning Dominion ships to ash one by one. The rift devoured the enemy. Cheers rose through the command deck as the swarm broke and fled. Saren stood in silence, his chest rising and falling, his heart pounding with fire. It was victory, his victory. But as the cheers filled the chamber, Saren noticed the shadow in the corner, an officer who had delayed an order earlier, a whisperer who had doubted every command. Now his gaze lingered too long on Saren's banner. His jaw clenched too tight, the rot was still here, hidden, waiting. That night, Saren walked the silent halls of the Ember Crown. He passed the barracks where soldiers laughed over their narrow survival, the halls where engineers sang to the hum of engines. For the first time, Saren felt the fleet's heartbeat. It was not just his blade, but a living, breathing thing. And somehow, impossibly, they were beginning to trust him. Yet trust was fragile. Betrayal could shatter it with one cut. He paused before the viewport, staring into the rift's glowing storms. His reflection stared back, an orphan boy, skin shadowed, eyes burning with something harder than hope. Nobility was not in blood. It was in fire, and Saren vowed then, he would not only survive the noble's poison, he would outburn it. He would make them bow whether they willed it or not. When dawn came, reports arrived. The Dominion had pulled back from the rift, but not in defeat. They were gathering, coiling, preparing a blow not against borders, but against the Emperor's very heart. The war was no longer about survival. It was about the throne itself, and Saren, once orphan, once pet, now commander, would march at its center. The siege of embers, the stars above the Emperor's world burned red with war. From the high towers of obsidian, the people of the throne world watched the heavens bleed. Dominion fleets blotted out constellations, vast and many, like a tide of darkness spilling across eternity. Their engines pulsed with venomous green, their spined hulls casting shadows across the palace spires. The Emperor's banners burned across the void. But even the great armadas seemed small against that endless swarm. And at the vanguard of the defense stood Saren. His fleet, scarred but unbroken, glided into formation around the throne world. The Ember Crown hummed beneath his feet, its engines alive with fire. Saren's banner hung above the command deck, glowing faintly, ashes woven into flame. The nobles had thought to chain him with command. Now in this hour of despair, he was their only hope. But Saren knew the danger was not only above. Whispers still gnawed at his command. Orders altered in transmission. Ammunition misplaced. Shadows moving through the lower decks. Saboteurs walked among his officers. The noble's poison had seeped deep, even into the veins of his own fleet. It was not enough that Saren fight the Dominion. He would be bled from within if he faltered. The Dominion came like storm. Waves of spined ships surged against the throne world's defenses, their cannons tearing through outposts and satellites. Shields flared, towers cracked, entire defense lines fell in sparks and silence. Saren gave no thought to fear. He saw angles, rhythms, openings where none seemed to exist. His voice cut through chaos. Break their wings. Strike where they spread. The fleet moved with him, riding the Dominion's momentum instead of meeting it head-on. They darted between larger vessels, tearing the swarm apart piece by piece. Saren's instincts guided them like fire finding cracks in stone. But the enemy was endless. For every ship destroyed, 3 more surged forward. And then came the Leviathan, a Dominion warship vast as a mountain, its hull a cathedral of bone and steel. Its engines glowing with the power of a dying star. It drifted into the center of the swarm, casting shadow across the throne world itself. Gasps echoed across every channel. Even Saren's blood went cold. As the Leviathan advanced, a signal flared within Saren's fleet. Orders, false orders, transmitted under his name. Retreat. Confusion rippled through the squadrons. Some ships pulled back, others froze, their formations unraveling. Saren spun, his eyes locking onto the source. A shadow on the lower deck, a figure at the comms console. A traitor. The officer who had lingered too long by the banner, who had delayed orders at the rift. Now his face twisted with open contempt. "You were never meant to rise," the traitor spat. "Better the throne burn than a mongrel command it." Blades flashed in the command chamber. Guards rushed, steel clashing in the flicker of firelight. Saren moved like instinct itself. His blade cut through air, striking the traitor down before more poison could spread. Blood hissed on the deck as the false orders ceased. The fleet steadied, but the Leviathan still loomed. Saren knew the truth in his bones. No formation, no defense line, no strategy could outlast such a beast. To fight it was to be consumed unless the rift itself had taught him well. He remembered how the rift devoured those who resisted it, how survival had come not by standing firm, but by bending, flowing, burning with chaos. Now the throne world itself must burn in that same fire. "Pull the fleets wide," Saren commanded. "Let it come to the heart. Let it strike at the throne." Shock rippled through his officers. To invite the Leviathan closer was madness. It would rain death upon the Emperor's palace, reduce the world itself to ash, but Saren's voice was steel. "Trust me." And for the first time, they did. The Leviathan surged inward, its vast cannons opening in a roar of green fire. Towers crumbled, shields shattered, cities burned. The Emperor's world screamed in agony. But Saren's fleet danced around it, never meeting its gaze, never striking its armor head-on. They struck at its wings, its escorts, its supports, thinning its swarm until the Leviathan drifted alone into the orbit of the throne world. Then Saren gave the order that sealed their fate. All engines forward, every vessel. Ram the beast. The officers froze. To ram was to die, but Saren's eyes burned. Better to burn in fire than live as ash. One by one, ships obeyed. The fleet surged as one, their engines blazing brighter than stars. They struck the Leviathan's flanks, drilling into its armored hide, igniting its veins of green energy. Saren's ember crown led the charge, its prow cutting into the monster's heart. The void lit in fire. The Leviathan convulsed, its hull tearing apart, its engine screaming before exploding in a bloom that turned night into day. The shockwave rolled across the throne world, rattling its towers, shattering its skies. But when the fire cleared, the Leviathan was gone. Ash drifted in silence, and Saren's banner still burned. The nobles could no longer deny him. The mongrel orphan, the pet of the palace, had broken the Dominion's strongest beast. His name roared through the fleets, through the cities, through the people who had watched the sky burn. But Saren did not stand in triumph. On the command deck, among the blood and ruin, he looked at the faces of those who had fallen, the officers who had doubted him, the traitor who had bled beneath his blade. Victory was ash. And somewhere beyond the fire, Saren felt the Dominion was not done. The Leviathan's fall was not their end, it was their opening move, and the greatest betrayal was yet to come. Fireborn of ash, the Leviathan's wreckage still smoldered in the void, but the war was not finished. The Dominion had not come for conquest alone. They had come to strike at the heart, to break the Emperor's line, to unravel the Empire from within. And Saren, the orphan boy who had once scavenged corpses for scraps, now stood as the shield between throne and annihilation. The fleets gathered in silence, ships battered and bleeding, crews hollow-eyed. Saren could see it in their faces. They were burned but unbroken. They had followed him through chaos and fire, and still, the whispers of betrayal lingered. That night, Saren was summoned to the Emperor's chamber. The obsidian hall glowed faintly with molten veins, shadows stretching high across vaulted walls. The Emperor sat upon his throne, his form vast and terrible, a crown of living fire upon his head. "You burn the beast," the emperor said. His voice rolled like thunder. The nobles bow, if only through clenched teeth. The people cry your name. "You have become more than flame, Saren. You are a blaze none can extinguish." Saren knelt, but unease coiled in his gut. He had learned enough of courts to hear what was unsaid. "And yet," the emperor continued, his eyes narrowing, "there are those who would see you fall. They whisper of mongrel blood, of chance victories, of power taken, not earned. They fear you." The silence stretched like a blade between them. "Will you bend, Saren?" the emperor asked at last. "Will you let the nobles grind you back to ash? Or will you burn even me if I stand in your way?" The words struck Saren deeper than any blade. It was not a question. It was a test, and in that moment Saren understood. The emperor did not seek loyalty. He sought proof that Saren could be fire enough to inherit flame. The Dominion's final wave fell like storm upon storm. No Leviathan this time, but countless swarms, endless ships pouring into the throne world skies. The city below blazed, its spires shattering beneath green fire. The people screamed. Saren led his fleet into the storm once more. His instincts burned hot, his commands sharp as glass. Ships bent with the enemy, flowing through the chaos, striking from angles unseen. And yet something fractured, orders twisted. Squadrons failed to respond. Ships hung still when they should have moved. Saren spun, rage flaring as realization dawned. The betrayal had not ended with the traitor's blood. This was open rebellion. The nobles had embedded their saboteurs deep, saving their strike for this moment of fire. As the Dominion pressed harder, Saren's own fleet splintered. Some ships fought with him, others pulled back. Their banners dim, the throne world itself trembled, caught between two enemies, one without, one within. On the command deck of the Ember Crown, Saren stood at the edge of despair. The Dominion surged like an ocean, the nobles' knives cut from within, and still the Emperor sat silent upon his throne. Was this the end? Fellery's voice broke through, fierce and trembling. "Look at them, Saren. Not the nobles. Not the traitors. The people. They watch the skies, and in those skies they see you, not pet, not mongrel flame." Saren's gaze lifted to the viewport. Through smoke and fire he saw the cities below, their towers burning, their streets shattered. And yet on the highest roofs the people stood, their faces turned upward, watching, waiting for him. And Saren knew then. Nobility was not in blood, nor crown, nor counsel. It was in the fire you gave when the world burned. His voice roared through the fleet, unshaken. "Those who would betray me, flee. Crawl back to your lords and tell them you cowered while flame burned. The rest burn with me." Silence followed. Then answers. One ship, then another, voices swearing through the channels. The majority still stood with him. Not by noble decree, by choice. The Ember Crown surged forward, Saren at its helm, and the fleet followed. They carved through the Dominion swarm, weaving chaos into strategy, instinct into victory. Ships collided, cannons blazed, fire painted the void. The traitors fell silent, their voices drowned in the storm. And Saren, orphan of ash, stood like flame incarnate. The battle ended not in triumph, but in silence. The Dominion fled, their swarm shattered. The throne world burned, its towers broken, its skies scarred, but it still stood, and Saren's banner still burned above it. In the council chamber, the nobles knelt in forced silence. The Emperor's gaze fell upon Saren, heavy as stone, fierce as fire. "You have given the throne its breath," the Emperor said. "You have burned brighter than blood. But flame is hungry, Saren. Flame does not rest. If you take this path, you are no longer orphan, no longer pet. You are fire, and fire consumes all." Saren lifted his head. The chamber's glow danced in his eyes, not as reflection but as truth. "I was born in ash," he said, "and I will burn until only light remains." The Emperor's laughter rolled like thunder, terrible and proud. "Then rise, Saren flame-born. No longer mongrel, no longer orphan. The fire is yours." And so the boy once left for dead, the orphan once mocked as pet, became more than commander, more than noble, more than flame. He became legend, not because of bloodline, not because of throne, but because when fire came he did not cower, he burned. And in burning, he taught a people that nobility is not inherited, it is forged in fire.